September 27th, 1941. Just after dawn. Baltimore Harbor, Maryland. The air smells like cold steel and river water. A low horn sounds across the harbor, not loud, more like a throat being cleared before a long sentence. Men in heavy coats stand shoulder to shoulder along the edge of the slipway, boots planted on damp planks. Some hold coffee tins. Some keep their hands deep in their pockets, fingers stiff from the early chill. In front of them, a ship waits. She is enormous, boxy, unglamorous. Her hull is a flat gray wall that blocks the rising sun. There are no sweeping curves, no proud lines like the liners that once crossed the Atlantic. The ship looks blunt, practical, almost unfinished. Her name is painted near the bow in white letters, Patrick Henry. Inside the hull, the metal ticks softly as it cools from the night's work. Rivets creak. Somewhere deep inside, a hammer rings once, then stops. A foreman raises his arm. The yard falls quiet. If you listen closely, you can hear the city behind them waking up. Streetcars whining. A gull screaming overhead, the far-off hum of traffic. But here, on the edge of the water, every sound feels sharpened, focused. This is not just a launch. Everyone knows that. Frank Malloy stands near the front of the crowd, cap pulled low. He is 38 years old, a former auto worker from Ohio who came east when the yard started hiring faster than it could keep track of names. His gloves are scarred from welding sparks. There's a burn mark on his left sleeve he never bothered to patch. Frank has worked on ships before. Small ones, repairs, nothing like this. He looks at the hull and feels something strange in his chest. Not pride, not fear, something heavier. A sense that this ship is less a vessel than a statement. Behind him, a younger man named Eddie Klein shifts his weight. Eddie is 22, fresh from a farm in western Pennsylvania. He still smells faintly of hay and engine grease. He arrived 6 weeks ago and learned to weld in a classroom that used chalkboards, still dusty from arithmetic lessons. Hard to believe, Eddie mutters almost to himself. They say it wasn't even a year ago this was empty water. Frank doesn't answer right away. He keeps his eyes on the ship. Yeah, he says finally. Hard to believe. The sponsor steps forward. A bottle swings. Glass shatters against steel. Cheers rise quick and rough like a wave breaking early. Then the blocks are pulled. For a moment, nothing happens. The ship seems to hesitate, as if considering the crowd, the river, the world beyond the harbor mouth. Then gravity takes over. Wood groans. The hull shudders. Slowly at first, then faster, she slides down the greased ways and into the water. The splash is massive. Water surges up the sides, soaking the front rows. Men laugh and shout. Hats go flying. The ship settles, rocking once, twice, and then she floats. Frank exhales without realizing he'd been holding his breath. This ship took less than a year to build. That alone feels impossible. Before this war, merchant ships were crafted, not produced. Each one a project, each one its own problem. But this yard, and others like it, has been learning a different language. A language borrowed from automobile plants and refrigerator factories. A language of repetition. Frank remembers the early days. Confusion. Parts arriving out of order. Blueprints changing weekly. Men arguing over methods that felt wrong. You don't build a ship the way you build a car. Or so they thought. But the supervisors kept pushing. Break it down, they said. Smaller jobs, smaller pieces. Let one man do one thing again and again until his hands know it better than his head does. At first, it felt soulless. Now, watching the Patrick Henry float free, Frank understands something he couldn't before. This isn't about beauty. It isn't even about ships. It's about numbers. Across the Atlantic, German submarines are already hunting. Steel wolves in dark water. They don't care how elegant a ship looks. They only care how fast it sinks. Someone in Washington understands that. Someone has decided that the answer isn't to build perfect ships. It's to build so many that sinking them becomes pointless. Eddie nudges Frank, pointing toward the yard behind them. Another keel is already laid. Beyond that, another, and another. Skeletons of future ships stretch into the distance, ribs rising from the ground like the frames of enormous beasts. How many you think they'll make? Eddie asks. Frank watches the water ripple around the hull. I think, he says slowly, they're just getting started. The harbor settles, the cheers fade, work whistles blow, and the men turn back toward the yard where the next ship is already waiting to be born. October. 1941 comes in with rain. It turns the Baltimore yard into a maze of mud and steel plates slick as ice. Boots sink. Cranes swing overhead like slow, patient animals. The air is filled with the sharp smell of wet welding flux and hot paint fighting the cold. Inside a temporary office made from plywood and optimism, Helen Carter studies a chalkboard crowded with arrows and numbers. She is 32, an industrial engineer borrowed from an appliance factory in Chicago. Her coat is still too nice for a place like this, though the cuffs are already stained. Helen is not supposed to be here. Not really. Shipyards have traditions. They have hierarchies. They have men who've been building vessels since before she was born. When she arrived, several foremen looked at her like she'd wandered into the wrong building. But the board in front of her doesn't care about traditions. It shows time, lost time, wasted steps. 2 welders waiting on a crane, 3 plates stacked in the wrong order. A pipe section was installed twice because the first crew didn't realize the second crew had already done it. Helen taps her chalk against her palm. "This," she says, turning to the room, "is why we're slow." Frank Malloy leans against the wall near the back, arms crossed. He's been called into meetings like this before. They usually end with speeches and nothing changing. One of the older supervisors clears his throat. "Ships aren't refrigerators," he says. "They're not stoves. You can't just—" "I know," Helen cuts in, calm but firm. "That's what everyone keeps telling me." She walks to the window and points out toward the yard, where sparks flicker like fireflies in the rain. But steel is steel. Men are men. Time is time. And right now, we're spending too much of it waiting. She turns back. "What if hull sections arrived finished?" she asks. "Pipes installed, wiring run, paint on. What if you didn't build the ship from the keel up, but from the inside out?" The room goes quiet. Frank shifts his weight. He pictures it. Sections built somewhere else. Brought in by rail. Lifted into place like giant blocks. Welded together fast. It sounds wrong, which is exactly why it might work. Outside, the yard keeps moving. New faces arrive every week. Farmers, shop clerks, women in coveralls who still braid their hair before shifts, men too old for the draft, teenagers lying about their age. They train fast, or they don't train at all. Eddie Klein learns to weld vertical seams in 3 days. His hands shake at first, then they don't. He starts to measure time not in hours, but in inches of seam laid down before the whistle blows. Mistakes happen. Plates warp. Welds crack. Once, a section doesn't fit at all, and the crane operator freezes with 50 tons of steel hanging in the air. No one laughs. They fix it. They always fix it. By November, the yard feels different, louder, more confident, less apologetic. Ships no longer grow like trees. They appear in chunks, bow sections resting beside sterns, deckhouses sitting on the ground like misplaced buildings. Crews swarm each piece, finishing work that would have once waited until the ship was afloat. Helen walks the yard with a clipboard, dodging forklifts and cursing puddles. She talks to welders like Frank, to electricians, to riveters who are slowly being phased out and know it. Some resent her, some thank her. Most just want the work to make sense. One night, Frank stays late, helping fit a prefabricated bulkhead. The floodlights hum overhead. Rain drums on steel. Eddie works beside him, quieter than usual. "You hear about the convoy?" Eddie asks. Frank nods. He's heard. Ships lost. More than a dozen in 1 week. Names printed small in the paper, if at all. "They say the submarines are picking them off one by one," Eddie says, like it's nothing. Frank wipes sweat from his face despite the cold. He looks at the seam they're finishing, then at the massive section beside them, ready to be lifted tomorrow. "Then we make it something," he says. By December, the numbers begin to change. Days shaved off here, weeks there. A launch schedule that once felt like wishful thinking starts to feel conservative. When the news comes from Hawaii, it hits the yard like a physical blow. Work stops. Men cluster around radios. Some swear, some go silent. The war is no longer coming, it is here. The next morning, the gates open early. No speeches, no flags, just steel waiting to be shaped. Helen updates the chalkboard. Frank pulls on his gloves. Eddie checks his mask. And somewhere far out at sea, the clock starts ticking louder. January, 1942, North Atlantic. The sea is black and restless, rolling under a moonless sky. A convoy moves east in a loose column, dark shapes cutting through the water with no lights, no music, no ceremony. The only sound is the slap of waves against steel and the distant churn of propellers. On one of those ships, a young radio operator named Samuel Ortiz sits hunched over his set, headphones pressing his ears raw. He hasn't slept properly in days. Every creak of the hull feels louder at night. Every shadow looks wrong. He doesn't know who built this ship. He doesn't know their names. But he knows the weld seams run straight, the engine answers when called, and the ship keeps moving. That has to be enough. Below the surface, a German submarine commander watches through a periscope. He sees silhouettes. He chooses one. He fires. The explosion is sudden and violent. Fire blooms against the dark. One ship slows, then begins to list. The convoy does not stop. It cannot. Samuel grips the edge of his desk as the shockwave passes. Somewhere behind them, men are abandoning ship. Somewhere else, another submarine is already lining up its next target. This is what the war at sea looks like in early 1942. It is not a battle. It is a calculation. And for months, the numbers favor the hunters. Back in the United States, the reports arrive in stacks. Tonnage lost, routes threatened, cargo never delivered, oil, food, ammunition, gone before they ever reach a front line. In Washington, the language changes. Fewer speeches, more charts. The question becomes brutally simple. Can you build ships faster than the enemy can sink them? In the yards, the answer is being shaped every day. Baltimore, Richmond, Portland, New Orleans. Yards that once launched a handful of ships each year now work around the clock. Floodlights turn night into day. Shifts blur together. Calendars lose meaning. Frank Malloy barely notices when winter turns to spring. His world has narrowed to steel plates, chalk marks, and the steady rhythm of work. He has welded the same joint so many times that his hands move before his mind catches up. That's the point. Eddie Klein is promoted to lead a small crew. He's still young, but he knows the sequence now. Knows what comes next without being told. When a section arrives late, he reroutes his team without waiting for orders. Nobody tells him to do that. Nobody has time. Helen Carter's chalkboard has been replaced by printed schedules. Colored tags hang from bulkheads. Green means ready. Yellow means waiting. Red means something is wrong and needs fixing now. The yard speaks in colors and numbers. The biggest change isn't speed, it's predictability. A Liberty ship now takes months, not years, then weeks. Then, once famously, just a handful of days from keel to launch. The yard celebrates that one, but quietly. Records are nice. Consistency is better. The ships themselves are not loved. Sailors joke about them, call them ugly, call them slow, call them floating coffins when the seas get rough, but they keep coming. Every time a submarine sinks one, another slides down the ways. Sometimes 2, sometimes 3. Across the ocean, German commanders begin to notice something unsettling. Sinkings continue, but the shipping lanes do not empty. The silhouettes in the periscopes do not thin out. If anything, there are more of them. The math is changing. Samuel Ortiz survives his crossing. So does his ship. It limps into port with scorch marks on the hull and a story nobody wants to tell twice. 2 weeks later, it's back at sea again. Frank hears about it in a roundabout way, from a supervisor who read a memo that summarized a report written by someone who never saw the ocean. It lists the ship by hull number, not name. Frank thinks about the seam he welded near the bow, wonders if that was the one that held. By mid-1942, the yards are no longer experimenting. They are executing. Victory ships follow, improved and faster, lessons learned baked into steel, engines with more power, hulls with small refinements that make big differences over long distances. No one in the yard calls it strategy, they call it work. But out on the Atlantic, the result is undeniable. Convoys arrive, supplies pile up, the flow does not stop. The war at sea is still dangerous, men still die, ships still sink. But inevitability has shifted sides, and the men and women in the yards feel it, even if they don't say it out loud. They feel it in the way the launches no longer draw crowds, in the way a completed ship is just another line checked off a list, in the way the next hull is already waiting. Summer 1943. The Richmond yards on the west coast glow at night like a city floating on land. Floodlights hum, cranes sweep slowly across the sky. From a distance, it looks almost peaceful. Up close, it's relentless. Metal screams as it's cut. Welding arcs flash blue-white, leaving after-images and tired eyes. The air is thick with smoke and salt and sweat. You can taste iron on your tongue. Mary Alvarez wipes her forehead with the back of her glove and checks her watch. She used to work behind a department store counter in Sacramento. Now she supervises a team fitting engine mounts into a Victory ship hull. Her hands are steady. Her voice carries. "Bring it down slow," she calls. "Easy, easy." The engine settles into place with a dull, satisfying thud. Her crew moves in without waiting. Bolts go in, wrenches turn. Someone hums a tune nobody recognizes. Mary doesn't smile. Not yet. She has learned that speed isn't about rushing. It's about removing hesitation. Across the yard, a Liberty ship is already sliding toward the water. There's no ceremony, no bottle, just gravity and timing. As soon as it floats free, tugs move in. The slipway is cleared. Within hours, the next hull begins to take shape. Frank Malloy visits the West Coast that summer, sent as part of a small group to compare methods. He stands with Helen Carter on an elevated platform, watching the choreography below. "They don't stop," Frank says. Helen shakes her head. "They can't." The yards are linked now. What works in Richmond is copied in Baltimore within weeks. What fails in New Orleans is quietly abandoned everywhere else. There's no pride in local methods anymore, only results. Eddie Klein writes letters home he never finishes. He keeps starting them, then tearing them up. How do you explain that you're proud of building something designed to be replaceable? He has learned the answer, though he doesn't put it into words. Replaceable means unstoppable. Out at sea, the change is impossible to ignore. Convoys stretch longer, escorts grow more confident. Submarines still strike, but they face ships that move faster, turn better, and arrive in greater numbers. German reports begin to sound strained. Sinkings are up, sinkings are down. Sinkings don't matter as much as they used to, because the yards don't slow down. Mary's crew finishes their shift. Another crew steps in. The engine room fills with new voices, new hands, the same practiced motions. The ship doesn't care who builds it. It only cares that it is finished. Frank walks along the quay as another launch thunders into the water. He barely flinches now. He has seen too many. Instead, he watches the calendar nailed to a post, dates crossed out in thick pencil. Tomorrow already circled. He realizes something then. This isn't just production. It's pressure. Constant, unyielding. The Axis can plan an operation. They can concentrate forces. They can choose a moment. The yards do not choose moments. They create them. Every day. April, 1945. The Baltimore yard feels quieter now, though it's still busy. Not slower, just different. The urgency has changed shape. Men still work hard, but they talk more, laugh more. Some even plan what they'll do when the noise finally stops. Frank Malloy stands near the water again, older than he was when the Patrick Henry first slid into the harbor. His hair is streaked with gray. His hands ache in the mornings. He no longer welds every day. He trains, watches, corrects. Another Victory ship rests at the pier, nearly ready. She looks familiar. They all do. Frank runs a hand along the hull, feeling the cold steel under his palm. He doesn't know where this one will go. The Pacific, maybe. Or another Atlantic run. He doesn't need to know. What matters is that she will go. Helen Carter walks up beside him, clipboard tucked under her arm. She stayed longer than she ever expected. Long enough for the yard to stop feeling temporary. They're talking about drawdowns, she says quietly. After Germany. Frank nods. He's heard. For years, the war felt endless. Now it feels like something with edges. A shape you can finally see. Across the ocean, ports overflow, ships crowd harbors. Supplies stack higher than anyone imagined in 1941. The problem is no longer scarcity, it's movement, organization. Choosing where to send what and when. That problem exists because the first one was solved. Not by a single battle, not by a single commander, but by repetition. By showing up every day and doing the same hard thing slightly better than the day before. Eddie Klein never went to sea. He never fired a weapon. When the war ends, he will go home and tell people he worked in a shipyard. Some will nod politely, some won't understand, but the sailors will. So will Samuel Ortiz, now a veteran radio operator who has crossed the Atlantic more times than he can count. He remembers ships lost, friends lost, but he also remembers how the convoys kept coming, no matter what the ocean threw at them. That constancy mattered. On paper, Liberty and Victory ships were simple, slow, unremarkable, designed to be built fast and used hard. In reality, they carried something heavier than cargo. They carried certainty. Certainty that food would arrive, that fuel would flow, that armies would not stop for lack of shells or trucks or boots. Certainty that sinking one ship would not change the outcome because another was already on the way. By the time the war ends, more than a ship a day has come off American ways at the peak. Numbers so large they stop feeling real. But Frank remembers when they weren't. He remembers mud and confusion and arguments over chalkboards. He remembers wondering if it would ever be enough. It was. The yard whistle blows, work pauses, men look up. Some remove their caps. News travels fast now. Germany has surrendered. There is no cheering at first, just stillness. Then sound breaks through. Relief, laughter, a few quiet sobs. Frank looks out at the harbor, at the ships, at the water that once felt like a barrier and now feels like a road. The war was fought in many places, on beaches, in skies, in cities reduced to rubble. But it was also fought here, in noise and repetition. In schedules and welds and hands that learned to move faster because they had to. The Axis built weapons. America built momentum. And once that momentum took shape in steel and numbers, it became something no submarine, no strategy, and no delay could stop.